There is a level of mental strength that changes how the world reacts to you, a quiet inner solidity that cannot be shaken by pressure, criticism, or uncertainty. This kind of strength does not announce itself loudly, yet it is immediately felt by everyone around it. You recognize it in people who do not rush to defend themselves, who do not collapse when challenged, and who remain composed when others lose control. Most people assume this calm is the result of luck, personality, or some rare genetic gift, but that assumption exists only to protect them from an uncomfortable truth. Real mental toughness is built, not inherited, and it is built through a process that demands sacrifice, discomfort, and consistency. Centuries ago, Japanese warriors understood this better than anyone else. While the modern world teaches avoidance of stress and protection of comfort, these warriors followed a radically different path, one that deliberately placed them in the presence of fear and hardship so often that fear eventually lost its power over them. This was not accidental, nor was it mystical. It was systematic, intentional, and brutally honest about the price of strength. They knew that a mind protected from challenge would remain fragile, while a mind repeatedly exposed to difficulty would harden and stabilize. This is why legends like Miyamoto Musashi were not merely skilled fighters, but individuals whose composure seemed inhuman. Musashi did not dominate because he lacked fear or doubt, he dominated because fear and doubt no longer dictated his actions. He had trained himself to remain centered while others unraveled. The foundation of this ability was not found in sword techniques or battle strategies, but in an internal discipline that reshaped how the mind responded to adversity. This discipline rejected comfort as an enemy and treated discomfort as a teacher. Where most people seek reassurance, approval, and emotional safety, these warriors sought exposure, resistance, and pressure. They understood that the nervous system adapts to what it repeatedly experiences, and that by choosing controlled hardship, they could train their reactions at the deepest level. Over time, this transformed stress from a threat into a signal for focus. Instead of panic, there was presence. Instead of hesitation, there was clarity. The warrior did not need to eliminate chaos from the world, because chaos no longer disrupted his inner state. This is the difference between someone who survives pressure and someone who is strengthened by it. The immovable quality people admired was not arrogance or emotional coldness, but the absence of internal resistance. Life could push, criticize, and challenge, yet the mind remained anchored. This mental armor was not visible, but it was more reliable than any physical protection. It allowed a person to move through conflict, uncertainty, and loss without being internally shattered. The modern world still creates pressure, though in different forms, through social judgment, professional stress, and constant comparison. The same principles apply today as they did 600 years ago. A mind trained to face discomfort does not break when challenged, it adapts. The forbidden discipline that made Musashi unbeatable begins here, with the acceptance that strength is forged, not found, and that the path to becoming untouchable starts with the willingness to step directly into what most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Most people live their entire lives trying to manage discomfort instead of training themselves to endure it. From an early age, they learn to avoid situations that cause anxiety, embarrassment, or emotional pain, and over time this avoidance quietly shapes the nervous system. Each time discomfort is escaped, the mind learns that stress is dangerous and must be avoided at all costs. This is why criticism feels like a personal attack, why conflict feels unbearable, and why pressure causes so many people to shut down or lash out. Ancient Japanese warriors observed this pattern long before modern psychology existed, and they came to a conclusion that directly contradicted the instinct to seek comfort. They believed that avoidance weakens the mind, while exposure strengthens it. This belief was not philosophical optimism, but a practical understanding of how the human system adapts. Samurai culture treated hardship as a training ground, not a threat, and this mindset reshaped how they experienced fear and uncertainty. Instead of asking how to eliminate discomfort, they asked how to stand calmly within it. This difference in approach produced warriors who could function clearly under conditions that would overwhelm an untrained person. The discipline they followed demanded that they confront the very sensations and emotions that most people spend their lives running from. Cold, exhaustion, uncertainty, criticism, and the possibility of failure were not accidents to be avoided, but tools deliberately used to build resilience. By repeatedly exposing themselves to controlled stress, they taught their nervous systems that discomfort was survivable, temporary, and manageable. Over time, the body stopped interpreting stress as a signal to panic and began interpreting it as a signal to focus. This is why their calm appeared unnatural to outsiders. They had trained their reactions so deeply that fear no longer hijacked their behavior. This principle applies just as strongly in modern life, even though the threats are rarely physical. A difficult conversation, public judgment, or professional failure triggers the same biological response as physical danger. The heart rate increases, the breath shortens, and the mind looks for escape. Without training, this response controls behavior. With training, it becomes background noise. The warriors understood that mental armor could not be built through positive thinking or self-soothing alone. Comfort may reduce stress in the moment, but it does nothing to increase capacity. Capacity only grows when it is challenged. This is why the samurai rejected the idea of safety as a permanent state. They knew that safety without challenge leads to fragility. The discipline that made them formidable was rooted in deliberate exposure, not reckless self-destruction, but controlled and intentional hardship. Each exposure was a lesson to the mind that it could endure more than it believed. Over months and years, these lessons accumulated, creating a nervous system that remained steady even in chaos. This steadiness was not emotional numbness, but emotional regulation at the highest level. The warrior still felt fear, stress, and pain, but these sensations no longer dictated his actions. The modern individual often mistakes emotional control for suppression, but the samurai understood the difference. Suppression creates tension and eventual collapse, while exposure creates adaptation and stability. This distinction explains why their discipline remains relevant centuries later. It does not promise comfort or happiness, but something far more valuable, the ability to remain functional, composed, and effective regardless of circumstances. The second step in becoming mentally unbreakable begins with abandoning the illusion that comfort leads to strength and accepting the uncomfortable truth that resilience is built only by repeatedly stepping into what the mind instinctively resists. At the heart of this ancient discipline was a concept that defined the mental superiority of the samurai, a state of mind known as feudal, often translated as the immovable mind. This did not mean an emotionless or cold personality, nor did it imply the absence of fear, pain, or doubt. Instead, it described a mind that could experience these sensations without being controlled by them. The immovable mind remains steady while emotions rise and fall, much like a mountain that stands firm while storms pass over it. Samurai understood that fear is not an enemy to be eliminated but a natural response to uncertainty and danger. What separates the weak from the strong is not whether fear appears, but whether it is allowed to dictate behavior. Feudal was developed through relentless training that placed warriors in situations where fear was unavoidable, forcing them to function clearly despite their internal reactions. Over time, the mind learned that fear did not require immediate action, and this separation between sensation and response became the foundation of their mental armor. This training rewired the nervous system in a way modern people rarely experience, because contemporary life is designed to minimize discomfort rather than build tolerance to it. Samurai culture, in contrast, intentionally stripped away comfort so that clarity could emerge under pressure. They believed that a calm mind in chaos was more valuable than any weapon, because a clear mind could adapt, while a panicked one could not. This understanding shaped every aspect of their daily lives, from meditation practices to physical training. Long periods of stillness were used to confront restlessness and pain, while intense physical exertion was used to teach the body to obey the mind even when exhausted. These practices were not separate from mental training, they were the training. Each moment of discomfort was an opportunity to observe the mind's impulse to escape and to resist that impulse without suppression. Over time, this created a gap between stimulus and reaction, and within that gap lived freedom. Modern psychology often describes this as emotional regulation, but the samurai experienced it as discipline. They did not intellectualize it or analyze it, they practiced it until it became automatic. The immovable mind was not achieved through insight alone, but through thousands of repetitions that taught the body and mind to remain present under stress. This is why their composure seemed unnatural to observers. They were not calm because circumstances were easy, they were calm because difficulty had become familiar. The concept of feudal also challenged the ego, which is often the true source of emotional instability. Pride, identity, and the need for validation are easily threatened by criticism or failure, causing reactive behavior. Samurai training eroded this attachment by repeatedly placing the individual in humbling situations where control and perfection were impossible. By facing discomfort without resistance, the ego gradually loosened its grip, allowing actions to arise from clarity rather than self-protection. This is why the immovable mind feels powerful yet quiet. It does not seek recognition or dominance, because it is no longer driven by the fear of being diminished. In modern life, this same principle can be applied through deliberate exposure to stressors that challenge emotional reactions, such as speaking up despite fear, remaining silent when provoked, or staying present during uncertainty. Each exposure trains the nervous system to remain steady, reducing the intensity of future reactions. Feudal is not achieved in a moment of insight but through daily practice that slowly reshapes how the mind responds to challenge. This third stage of the discipline reveals that true strength is not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to remain unmoved at the core while disturbance passes through, leaving the mind intact, clear, and free to act without hesitation. As this discipline deepened, the samurai understood that an immovable mind could not be forged through theory alone, and this realization led them to embrace deliberate hardship as a way of life rather than an occasional challenge. They believed that comfort weakens perception, dulls awareness, and creates dependence, while controlled suffering sharpens attention and builds internal authority. Every aspect of their training was designed to remove reliance on external conditions for stability. Hunger, exhaustion, cold, and uncertainty were not obstacles to be avoided but tools to be used. Through repeated exposure, the nervous system learned a critical lesson: discomfort is not the same as danger. Once this distinction was internalized, panic lost its power. A samurai could feel pain without desperation, fear without paralysis, and pressure without confusion. This was not stoicism in the sense of emotional suppression. Emotions were allowed to arise fully, but they were no longer obeyed automatically. The mind learned to observe sensations as information rather than commands. This ability created a profound sense of inner sovereignty, a state in which no external force could dictate internal balance. Samurai rituals reflected this philosophy with ruthless clarity. Long hours of meditation were performed not for relaxation but to confront restlessness and mental noise. When the body ached and the mind screamed for movement, the practitioner remained still, learning that urges could be endured without acting on them. Physical training followed the same logic. Endless repetitions, brutal conditioning, and exposure to harsh environments trained the body to function under strain, while simultaneously teaching the mind that discomfort was survivable. Over time, resistance faded and presence increased. This presence was the true weapon of the warrior. In battle, chaos is inevitable, plans collapse, and fear arises instantly. A warrior trained in comfort would break under such conditions, while one trained in hardship would recognize chaos as familiar territory. This familiarity produced calm, and calm produced clarity. The samurai also understood that emotional weakness often hides behind social behavior, particularly the need for approval and the fear of judgment. To dismantle this, they cultivated practices that stripped away status and identity. Novices were humiliated, corrected harshly, and placed at the bottom of rigid hierarchies not to break them, but to reveal how fragile their sense of self truly was. Each moment of embarrassment became an opportunity to observe the ego's impulse to defend, justify, or withdraw. By enduring these moments without retaliation or collapse, the practitioner learned that dignity does not come from how others treat you, but from how you conduct yourself regardless of treatment. This lesson was essential, because a warrior who reacts emotionally to insult is easily manipulated. True strength required emotional independence, the ability to remain internally stable even when externally challenged. Over months and years, these practices rewired the practitioner's relationship with adversity. Hardship no longer felt personal or unfair, it became neutral, even expected. This shift changed how the mind interpreted events. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the trained mind asked, "What does this require of me now?" This orientation toward response rather than reaction is the hallmark of the immovable mind. It transforms suffering into training and obstacles into instruction. In modern life, where comfort is abundant and challenges are often psychological rather than physical, this principle remains just as relevant. Avoidance of discomfort trains fragility, while voluntary exposure trains resilience. Each time a person chooses the difficult conversation over silence, discipline over indulgence, or presence over escape, they are engaging in the same process the samurai used centuries ago. The immovable mind is not reserved for warriors on a battlefield, it is available to anyone willing to confront discomfort without retreat. This fourth layer of the discipline reveals a hard truth: strength is not given, and it is not discovered through insight alone. It is forged through repetition, humility, and the willingness to remain present when everything inside demands escape. This is the price of becoming unshakable, and it is paid daily, not once, by those who choose the path. At this stage of the discipline, the samurai turned their attention inward to the most dangerous enemy of all, unconscious habit. Miyamoto Musashi understood that no opponent could defeat a man more reliably than his own predictable patterns. A fighter who reacts the same way under pressure, who clings to familiar techniques, or who seeks safety in routine becomes readable, and what is readable is exploitable. To prevent this, Musashi trained himself to constantly dismantle his own habits before the world could do it for him. This principle extended far beyond combat. He believed that the mind naturally seeks efficiency by turning repeated actions into automatic behavior, but automation comes at a cost: awareness fades. When awareness fades, choice disappears. The samurai discipline therefore demanded constant vigilance over one's own tendencies, impulses, and defaults. Every action was an opportunity to ask, am I acting consciously, or merely repeating myself? This relentless self-observation was exhausting at first, but it was essential for cultivating true freedom. Musashi deliberately practiced unfamiliar stances, unconventional timing, and unexpected strategies not to confuse his enemy, but to prevent his own mind from becoming rigid. Rigidity, he believed, was the beginning of defeat. In daily life, this meant resisting the comfort of routine when it dulled perception. The samurai would change training conditions, alter schedules, and introduce uncertainty into their practice to keep the mind sharp. By doing so, they trained adaptability rather than perfection. Adaptability, unlike technique, cannot be taken away. When circumstances change suddenly, an adaptable mind responds smoothly, while a rigid one collapses. Musashi's philosophy emphasized that mastery is not the accumulation of techniques, but the ability to move freely without attachment to any single method. This is why he famously wrote about having no fixed stance and no fixed form. These were not poetic metaphors, but mental strategies. A mind without fixation remains fluid, able to flow around obstacles rather than crash into them. This flexibility also applied to emotional states. The disciplined warrior did not cling to confidence, nor did he fear doubt. Both were temporary conditions, useful or harmful depending on context. By refusing to identify with any single emotion, the samurai preserved clarity. Musashi warned that attachment to success was just as dangerous as fear of failure. Victory breeds complacency, while failure breeds hesitation, both distort perception. The disciplined mind treats outcomes as information, not identity. After a win, the warrior studies his weaknesses. After a loss, he studies his reactions. In both cases, learning continues uninterrupted. This approach created a mindset immune to both arrogance and despair. Another critical aspect of this discipline was the cultivation of solitude. Musashi spent long periods isolated, not out of antisocial tendencies, but to strip away external influence. He believed that constant interaction clouds judgment, as opinions, expectations, and comparisons slowly replaced direct experience. Solitude returned the practitioner to a neutral state, where thoughts could be examined without interference. In this silence, the warrior confronted uncomfortable truths about himself, hidden fears, unacknowledged desires, and unresolved conflicts. Facing these honestly prevented them from surfacing unpredictably in moments of stress. The samurai understood that what is ignored internally eventually manifests externally, often at the worst possible time. By integrating solitude into their discipline, they maintained psychological cleanliness. Over time, this deep self-awareness created an unusual calm. The practitioner no longer feared his own mind, because nothing within it was unknown. This familiarity bred confidence without bravado, strength without aggression. In modern terms, this fifth layer of the discipline teaches that mental dominance is not achieved by force, but by flexibility. The person who can adapt, observe, and release attachment remains powerful in any environment. Whether facing competition, uncertainty, or personal failure, the principles remain the same. Habits must be questioned, identity must remain fluid, and awareness must be actively maintained. Musashi's discipline reveals that the greatest advantage is not talent or intelligence, but the willingness to continually dismantle what you think you know. This is how stagnation is avoided, how growth remains constant, and how a person becomes truly difficult to defeat, not because they are aggressive, but because they are endlessly adaptable. At the sixth level of samurai discipline, Miyamoto Musashi focused on mastery of energy, how it is spent, preserved, and directed. He understood something most people never realize: discipline is not about forcing yourself to do more, but about wasting less. The average person loses enormous amounts of energy every day through indecision, emotional reactions, unnecessary conflict, and scattered attention. Musashi believed that a warrior who leaks energy in small ways will collapse when real pressure arrives. For this reason, samurai training emphasized control over both physical and mental expenditure. Every movement, every word, and every thought was meant to serve a purpose. Nothing was accidental. Nothing was excessive. This made the warrior efficient, calm, and terrifyingly effective. Musashi taught that emotional reactions are the fastest way to drain strength. Anger tightens the body, fear disrupts breathing, and anxiety fractures focus. While emotions are natural, indulging them is a choice. The disciplined samurai observed emotions without immediately obeying them. If anger appeared, it was acknowledged but not acted upon. If fear surfaced, it was examined, not suppressed. This created a gap between stimulus and response, a gap where power lives. Within that gap, the warrior could choose the most effective action instead of the most emotional one. Over time, this practice made Musashi exceptionally difficult to provoke or manipulate. His opponents wasted energy trying to intimidate or enrage him, while he remained centered, conserving strength for decisive moments. Another major energy leak Musashi warned against was unnecessary movement. In combat, wasted motion creates openings. In life, wasted effort creates exhaustion. The samurai therefore trained to eliminate anything that did not contribute directly to the objective. This principle applied to speech as well. Musashi was known for speaking little, not because silence was virtuous in itself, but because words carry energy. Talking too much dissipates focus and invites distraction. Silence, on the other hand, preserves internal momentum. When the disciplined warrior spoke, his words carried weight because they were rare and deliberate. In modern terms, this teaches the power of restraint. The ability to hold back, to not react, not explain, not prove, often creates more influence than constant expression. Musashi also applied energy discipline to decision-making. Indecision is one of the most exhausting mental states. A mind stuck between options burns energy without moving forward. The samurai trained themselves to decide quickly and commit fully, even when certainty was impossible. Musashi believed that hesitation was more dangerous than a reminder of error. Once a decision was made, doubt was released. This prevented the mind from splitting itself into competing narratives. If the outcome was poor, it was analyzed later, not emotionally replayed in the moment. This habit created a powerful sense of internal alignment. The warrior's thoughts, actions, and intentions moved in one direction, rather than pulling against each other. Rest was another overlooked component of this discipline. Contrary to modern hustle culture, Musashi did not glorify constant exertion. He understood that recovery is a form of training. The samurai rested intentionally, not as an escape, but as preparation. Sleep, stillness, and reflection restored clarity and strength. A rested mind sees opportunities a tired mind misses. By respecting cycles of effort and recovery, Musashi maintained longevity in both body and spirit. His discipline was sustainable, not explosive. Perhaps most importantly, Musashi taught that purpose concentrates energy. A warrior without a clear internal code scatters himself trying to satisfy external demands. The samurai lived by a defined set of principles, Bushido, which acted as a filter for decisions. If an action aligned with the code, energy flowed into it naturally. If it did not, it was discarded without guilt. This prevented internal conflict and moral confusion. The warrior did not need constant motivation because his actions were anchored to meaning. This sixth principle reveals that unbreakable discipline is not about intensity, but about precision. By conserving energy, regulating emotion, eliminating waste, and acting with purpose, Musashi achieved a state of quiet dominance. He did not rush. He did not panic. He did not burn out. He endured. In a world that rewards constant motion but punishes endurance, this lesson is more relevant than ever. The person who masters energy will always outlast, and outperform, the person who relies on force alone. At the seventh stage of samurai discipline, Musashi turned his focus inward toward identity, because he understood that the greatest limitation a warrior can have is a fixed self-image. Most people unconsciously protect an idea of who they are, strong or weak, talented or ordinary, confident or fearful. This identity becomes a prison. When behavior threatens the image, the ego intervenes to defend it, often at the cost of growth. Musashi rejected this entirely. He believed that attachment to identity creates hesitation, fear of failure, and emotional fragility. A warrior, he taught, must remain fluid, able to change form without resistance. To cultivate this flexibility, samurai training deliberately challenged self-perception. Warriors were placed in unfamiliar roles, given tasks where they were incompetent, and forced to confront their weaknesses publicly. This was not humiliation for cruelty's sake, but a method of dissolving ego attachment. When a person stops needing to appear skilled, intelligent, or dominant, they become free to actually learn. Musashi himself practiced multiple disciplines beyond swordsmanship, including painting, calligraphy, and philosophy. He approached each as a beginner, without concern for status. This willingness to be unskilled made him adaptable and mentally light, while others became rigid and predictable. The disciplined samurai learned to separate self-worth from performance. Victory did not inflate the ego, and loss did not destroy it. Both were treated as information. This emotional neutrality created resilience. A warrior who takes failure personally becomes cautious and defensive. One who views failure as data becomes dangerous, because he improves without emotional baggage. Musashi's calm acceptance of both success and defeat allowed him to evolve faster than his rivals. He was not trying to protect a reputation, he was trying to refine reality. This principle also extended to social identity. Musashi lived much of his life as a ronin, a masterless samurai, existing outside rigid hierarchies. This taught him independence of thought. Without loyalty to titles or institutions, his judgment remained clear. He evaluated situations based on truth, not tradition. For the samurai, freedom from identity meant freedom from peer pressure, fear of judgment, and the need for validation. A warrior who does not seek approval cannot be controlled through praise or shame. Another key aspect of this discipline was the acceptance of contradiction. Musashi believed that a strong mind can hold opposing ideas without confusion. A warrior could be gentle and ruthless, patient and decisive, humble and confident, depending on what the moment required. Modern thinking often demands consistency of personality, but samurai thinking demanded consistency of principle. Identity was flexible, values were not. This allowed the warrior to adapt behavior without feeling false or fragmented. By loosening attachment to identity, the samurai gained psychological speed. There was no internal debate about what kind of person I am before acting. The question became only, what is required now? This removed delay, doubt, and self-consciousness. Action flowed naturally, without the weight of self-definition. Musashi believed this state was essential for mastery, because mastery requires constant evolution, and evolution is impossible when the ego resists change. This seventh layer reveals a profound truth: the self you defend is the self that limits you. When identity dissolves, learning accelerates, fear weakens, and adaptability becomes instinctive. The samurai who mastered this principle became untouchable, not because they were flawless, but because nothing could trap them, not pride, not failure, not expectation. In a modern world obsessed with labels and self-image, this discipline offers rare freedom, the power to change without apology and to grow without resistance. At the eighth stage of discipline, Musashi emphasized the mastery of attention, because he understood that focus is the true battlefield long before any physical conflict begins. A distracted warrior is already defeated. The samurai believed that wherever attention goes, energy follows, and wherever energy flows, outcomes are shaped. For this reason, training the mind to remain present under all conditions became a core pillar of their discipline. Musashi warned that scattered attention weakens perception, slows reaction time, and clouds judgment. A focused mind, by contrast, sees clearly, acts decisively, and wastes nothing. Samurai training cultivated attention through simplicity. Their lives were intentionally stripped of excess. Few possessions, repetitive routines, and minimal indulgence reduced the number of decisions required each day. This conserved mental bandwidth for moments that mattered. Musashi believed that complexity breeds confusion, while simplicity creates sharpness. When the environment is calm and ordered, the mind mirrors that order. This is why samurai spaces were often austere, clean lines, empty rooms, and natural materials. These were not aesthetic choices alone, but psychological tools designed to stabilize awareness. Meditation played a critical role in strengthening attention. Unlike modern meditation, which often aims for relaxation, samurai meditation was about endurance of awareness. Practitioners sat with wandering thoughts, intrusive memories, and emotional noise without reacting. Each time attention drifted, it was calmly brought back. Over time, this built the ability to notice distraction instantly and recover focus without frustration. Musashi understood that attention is not about never losing focus, but about how quickly it is regained. A warrior who can return to presence faster than his opponent holds the advantage. This discipline also extended into combat philosophy. Musashi taught that true perception requires seeing without looking. This meant maintaining a broad, relaxed awareness rather than narrow fixation. A warrior who stares too hard at one threat becomes blind to others. By softening the gaze and expanding attention, the samurai could detect subtle movements, shifts in posture, and changes in intent. This same principle applies to life. When attention is too rigid, opportunities are missed. When it is too loose, discipline collapses. Mastery lies in balance. Musashi also warned against emotional hijacking of attention. Strong emotions pull focus inward, causing tunnel vision. Fear narrows awareness, anger accelerates thought, and desire distracts. The disciplined samurai trained to notice emotional shifts immediately, before they took control. By labeling emotions internally and returning attention to breath or posture, they prevented emotions from dominating perception. This created emotional clarity without suppression. Feelings were felt, but attention remained sovereign. Another powerful aspect of this discipline was single tasking. The samurai did one thing at a time, fully. Whether sharpening a blade, walking a path, or engaging an enemy, attention was total. Multitasking was seen as a form of weakness, dividing awareness and increasing error. Musashi believed that total presence transforms ordinary actions into training. Every moment became an opportunity to strengthen focus. At its core, this eighth principle teaches that discipline is not maintained by force, but by attention. When focus is trained, distractions lose power. When attention is stable, anxiety decreases and confidence rises naturally. In modern life, where attention is constantly attacked by noise, notifications, and endless stimulation, this discipline is revolutionary. The person who controls attention controls their inner world, and the one who controls their inner world becomes extraordinarily difficult to defeat. At the ninth stage of samurai discipline, Musashi addressed the relationship with fear, because he understood that fear never disappears, it only changes form. The mistake most people make is waiting to become fearless before acting. The samurai knew this was impossible. Courage, in their philosophy, was not the absence of fear but the refusal to let fear dictate behavior. Musashi taught that fear becomes destructive only when it is denied or resisted. When fear is observed calmly, it loses its authority. Samurai training therefore involved intentional exposure to fear. Warriors were placed in situations where uncertainty, risk, and pressure were unavoidable. This was not reckless danger, but controlled confrontation. By repeatedly entering fearful states without retreating, the nervous system learned that fear could be survived. Over time, fear stopped triggering panic and started triggering focus. This transformation was crucial. A warrior who panics becomes chaotic, one who focuses becomes lethal. Musashi emphasized understanding fear as a physical sensation rather than a prophecy. Tightness in the chest, shallow breath, racing thoughts, these were signals, not truths. The disciplined samurai trained to regulate breathing first, because breath anchors the mind. Slow, controlled breathing stabilized the body, which in turn stabilized perception. Once the body was calm, the mind could assess reality accurately instead of imagining worst-case scenarios. This practice turned fear into information rather than interference. Another key lesson was the danger of anticipatory fear. Musashi warned that worrying about future outcomes drains strength in the present. A warrior who fights tomorrow's battle in his mind arrives exhausted. Samurai discipline trained attention to remain in the immediate moment. The present, they believed, is the only place where action exists. Fear of what might happen was treated as a distraction, not a warning. Preparation was encouraged, rumination was not. Musashi also taught that fear is amplified by attachment. The more one clings to life, reputation, comfort, or outcome, the stronger fear becomes. Samurai philosophy encouraged acceptance of impermanence. By acknowledging that loss, pain, and death were inevitable parts of existence, warriors reduced fear's grip. This did not make them reckless, it made them composed. When the worst is accepted internally, it no longer controls behavior externally. A critical part of this discipline was reframing fear as responsibility. Fear often appears when something matters. Rather than viewing fear as weakness, Musashi saw it as a signal of significance. The presence of fear meant the moment deserved full attention. By stepping forward instead of retreating, the samurai transformed fear into commitment. Action replaced hesitation. This principle also applies deeply to modern psychological fears, fear of failure, rejection, and inadequacy. These fears paralyze more people than physical danger ever did. The samurai approach remains the same: act while afraid, observe the fear without obeying it, and let experience dissolve imagined threats. Each time this is done, confidence grows, not because fear vanished, but because it was survived. The ninth discipline reveals that fear is not the enemy. Avoidance is. The warrior who befriends fear gains access to clarity, presence, and courage under pressure. In a world where comfort encourages retreat at the first sign of anxiety, this ancient lesson offers rare power, the ability to move forward when everything inside urges escape. This is the difference between ordinary men and those history remembers. The final lesson of Musashi's discipline was not about dominance over others, but mastery over oneself, because an undefeated life is not measured by victories, but by inner stillness. He believed that the ultimate state of the warrior was not aggression, intensity, or constant readiness for conflict, but naturalness. When the mind no longer struggles against reality, when effort becomes invisible, strength becomes effortless. This is where true invincibility is born. Musashi taught that once discipline is fully absorbed, it disappears from conscious thought and becomes character itself. You no longer try to be calm, you are calm. You no longer force courage, you act with clarity. This state is what made him untouchable, long after the sword left his hand. At this level, the warrior stops chasing results. Winning and losing lose their emotional charge. Praise and criticism sound the same. Success does not inflate the ego, and failure does not damage the core. Musashi warned that attachment to identity is the final weakness. The moment you think, "I am strong," you create something that can be attacked. The immovable mind has no image to defend. It simply responds to reality as it is, not as it wishes it to be. This absence of inner conflict creates precision in action and peace in being. Musashi lived simply, often in isolation, not because he rejected society, but because he understood how easily noise pollutes clarity. He reduced his life to essentials so his mind could remain sharp and unobstructed. This was not escapism. It was intentional minimalism. By removing excess desire, comparison, and distraction, he preserved his mental energy for what mattered: awareness, practice, and presence. His discipline extended beyond combat into how he ate, slept, traveled, and thought. Everything became training. The final form of this discipline teaches that the greatest opponent is internal resistance. Life itself becomes the battlefield, and every inconvenience becomes a test. Delay, rejection, boredom, uncertainty, these are no longer enemies but tools. Each moment offers an opportunity to strengthen composure. When practiced long enough, resistance dissolves. Life no longer feels hostile or overwhelming. It simply unfolds. This is why Musashi never truly lost. Even death was not defeat, because his mind was never shaken. The body is temporary, but the discipline remains. His teachings were never meant to create warriors of violence, but individuals of unshakable center. In a chaotic world driven by emotion, reaction, and fear, this discipline creates rare stability. The forbidden discipline was never hidden because it was secret. It was ignored because it demands sacrifice. Daily discomfort. Relentless honesty. Lifelong practice. But for those willing to pay the price, the reward is freedom. Freedom from fear, from reactivity, from dependence on external validation. This is what made Musashi unstoppable, and this is what makes a person untouchable: not power over others, but power over the self.